Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an unbelievable and chilling story. Let's meet Thorn Ashford, an antiques restorer who died in a car accident and was taken to a spiritual realm where he had a complete life review and received disturbing visions about the future of humanity. What he discovered about the Pope and spiritual manipulation will leave you speechless. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and surprising journey. My name is Thorn Ashford. If you had met me before the accident, you would probably describe me as an ordinary man. I was 38 years old, living in Asheville, North Carolina, and working as an antique restorer. My life revolved around old, time-worn objects. There was something therapeutic about bringing life back to things that many would consider lost. However, while I knew exactly how to restore a piece of furniture, I had no idea how to fix the broken parts inside me. Eleanor, my wife, always said that time heals everything. She had an unshakable faith in purpose and destiny. While I looked at the world through a skeptical lens, she saw beauty and meaning in every detail. "Thorn, pain is part of the journey," she repeated. "Maybe it's what gets us to where we need to be." I always responded with a crooked smile and a quick change of subject. It was easier to play with the surface of things than to dive into the deep waters of emotions. That night, we were returning from my mother's house. The rain was falling heavily. The windshield wipers could barely keep up. Eleanor suggested we stop at a motel, or just until the storm passes. She insisted, her cold fingers touching my arm, but I was impatient, stubborn. "We're almost there," I replied, accelerating smoothly. If I had known these were our last moments together, I would have stopped. I would have held your hand a little tighter. I would have told her how much her faith fascinated me, even if I would never have admitted it. But I continued driving, driven by haste and pride. The winding road seemed endless, each turn a new promise of getting home, of lying in our bed and pretending the world outside didn't matter. Eleanor sighed beside me, her gaze lost in the rain running down the glass. "If only I had listened to your gut feeling, maybe everything would have been different." The silence after impact was almost absolute. Only the sound of rain persisted, falling heavily on the twisted metal of the car. I opened my eyes, but everything seemed blurry, as if I were looking through dirty glass. There was no pain, just a strange feeling of emptiness, as if my body were absent. Little by little, I realized that I was floating. The road stretched out below me, the wrecked car in the ditch, the wet asphalt reflecting the lights of the approaching ambulance. My body was down there, trapped in the wreckage. There was blood on my face, and my arm was bent in an impossible way. I knew I should feel horrified, but all there was a numbing calm. Eleanor was there too. I saw her move, coughing, trying to undo her seatbelt. Her trembling fingers tugged at the clasp again and again, her eyes wide with fear. "Thorn," his voice was weak, almost a whisper lost in the wind. "Thorn, please talk to me." I tried to respond, but my voice was gone. "I'm here," I shouted without sound, reaching out my hand to her. But my hand had no substance, and Eleanor couldn't see me. Panic should have invaded me, but the peace around me was greater than any despair. The light from the sirens bathed the scene in red and blue flashes. The paramedics rushed to the car, their voices muffled, as if they were coming from underwater. I watched as one of them touched my motionless wrist, shaking his head at the other. There was nothing more to do for me, but for Eleanor, there was still hope. She was pulled from the car, her sodden hair plastered to her pale face. As I watched, a gentle force pulled me upward. It wasn't something I could resist. It was like being enveloped by invisible hands, lifted from the ground with impossible lightness. The physical world began to recede, and I felt like I was being taken to a place that words couldn't describe. There was no fear, just the feeling that the unknown had always been there, waiting for me. The light that enveloped me was not just a physical brightness. It seemed to have texture, a welcoming warmth that penetrated my essence, washing away any trace of fear or doubt. When I opened my eyes again, the scenery around me was completely different. There was no more road, no rain, no debris. I was in a serene void where everything seemed to be suspended in a state of absolute tranquility. There was no ground beneath my feet, no sky above my head. The space was infinite, but at the same time cozy, as if every particle around me was whispering that I belonged there. It felt like home, even though I didn't know exactly where home was. It was then that a voice echoed, "Thorn Ashford." The voice had no tone, neither male nor female. She just was. "It's time." Before I could ask, "Time for what?" an invisible current pulled me, and before me, my life began to unfold. It wasn't just a vague memory. It was like reliving every moment as if time had folded in on itself, allowing me to walk through every choice again, every word spoken and unspoken. I saw my mother holding me in her arms for the first time, tears of exhaustion and love streaming down her face. I relived my childhood, the moments of purity and also the fears, like the night I stayed awake afraid of the dark and she held me until I fell asleep. Adolescence brought rebellion. I remembered the harsh words I said to my father, the sound of the door slamming when I left the house, swearing I would never return. And then came Eleanor, the first date, the first kiss, the promises made and those broken. Each scene was more than just an image. I felt everything, love in its purest form and pain like a knife cutting directly into my soul. The voice echoed again, "Nothing is lost." Every choice creates waves. I realized then that the small gestures that seemed insignificant, a smile to a stranger, a kind word, a moment of listening, had a greater impact than I could ever imagine. But I also saw the weight of wrong choices, of times when I was cold, selfish, indifferent. It was as if my soul wavered between love and regret, and each emotion hit me with full force. Reviewing my life brought a mixed feeling of relief and heaviness. Every memory, every choice, good or bad, was more than just an echo of the past. It was a living, raw truth that I needed to face. However, at the end of this journey through my own memories, an invisible barrier rose before me. It wasn't something physical, but an immense and insurmountable presence that prevented me from moving towards the light. I looked around, searching for answers, and then the faces appeared. At first they were just vague shadows, but slowly their features took shape. The first face was my father's. He was standing still, watching me with an expression that mixed sadness and deep hurt. The last time we saw each other, we had a big fight. I was young and arrogant, and he wanted me to follow the traditional family path by taking over the furniture store. I dreamed of restoring the old, not selling the new. "You never came back," he said. His voice was a whisper, but it reverberated in my soul like thunder. I wanted to respond, explain, justify. But there, in that space between life and death, justifications had no place. There was only the naked truth. He died without us reconciling, and the weight of that hurt was as real as the barrier in front of me. Other faces appeared. Elliot, my childhood friend, who I abandoned without a second thought when I entered college and made new friends. Madeline, an ex-girlfriend I left without even explaining. And an unknown man, but whose image brought back a vivid memory to me. The beggar I once denied help, without even looking him in the eye. These souls were not there to punish me, but to show me the weight of the actions I ignored. For every moment of indifference, there was an echo of pain. The voice that guided me spoke again. "You cannot move forward while you are stuck with what is left behind." My own emotional ties were the barrier that prevented me from moving forward. I needed to forgive, and he needed to be forgiven. With a heavy heart, I repeated the names of each of them. "I forgive them, and I ask you to forgive me." And as I said that, I felt like an invisible chain broke. The barrier in front of me melted away like fog in the sun, and an indescribable light flashed in front of me, inviting me forward. When the barrier fell apart, I was enveloped by a light so intense that closing my eyes was impossible. But this light didn't hurt. On the contrary, it warmed, embraced my soul like nothing I had felt before. I took a few steps, or at least that was the feeling, and the scenery around me transformed. The void gave way to a garden of indescribable beauty. The colors were more vibrant. The aromas seemed to mix with the air, and there was soft music, almost as if the wind itself was singing. There, in the middle of this paradise, was Eleanor. She looked younger, more alive than ever. His eyes had the same soft, welcoming glow, and his smile radiated the peace I craved. My heart, if there was still one there, jumped. I ran to her, and when I touched her, I felt the warmth of her skin, the texture of her hands. It was real. She was there. "Eleanor," my voice was shaky, filled with a love that seemed to transcend time. "You're here. I thought I lost you forever." She cupped my face in her hands, as soft as she always was. "My love, You never lost me. I have always been with you, and I always will be. I wanted to let myself stay there, in that eternal embrace, in that bubble of happiness where nothing in the real world mattered. But Eleanor's gaze carried a subtle sadness. Thorn, you can't stay. Those words were like a blow. What? No, I don't want to go back. I want to stay here, with you. She took a deep breath, and her expression was one of such deep love that my resistance began to crumble. You have something to do. Your mission on Earth is not over yet. There are people who need you. My legs gave way. But what about you? And us? She pulled me closer, her lips brushing my forehead in a soft kiss. One day we will meet again, and until then, you need to live. You need to spread the light you found here. Before I could respond, the air around us seemed to vibrate. A new presence made itself noticed. A being of light, whose energy was almost palpable, appeared next to Eleanor. Its form was ethereal, its light emanating ancient wisdom. Without having to say it, I knew who it was. Luciel, before you go back, there is something you need to see, said the angel, and the world around me changed once again. The transition was like a sudden tug. The heavenly garden disappeared, and I found myself floating above the earth. But it was not the earth as we know it. It was as if the world was in a state of continual chaos, a painting distorted by pain and confusion. Overlapping images flashed before me, each one more disturbing than the last. I saw cities being swallowed by raging waters, floods sweeping the streets and taking with them everything they found. Mountains crumbled, and fire consumed entire forests, turning the sky red and gray. People ran in despair, seeking shelter, safety, a hope that seemed increasingly distant. Wars broke out in different parts of the world. Armies marched, but the real battlefield seemed to be the human soul. There was despair on the faces, an emptiness in the eyes of those who had lost everything, not just materially, but spiritually. The shadows of fear and distrust spread like a silent epidemic. In the midst of all this chaos, one figure stood out. A man dressed in white, wrapped in a sumptuous robe, sits on a golden throne inside a huge cathedral. His image was imposing, and the crowd around him worshipped him as if he were the manifestation of peace itself. However, his eyes glowed strangely, a cold, calculating gleam. He spoke about peace, about unity, but his words were distorted. There was a subtle falsehood in his tone, something that made my soul shiver. Still, people knelt before him, giving their hopes and their souls. It was as if he was a magnet, drawing the crowds into an invisible abyss. Beside me, Luciel watched in silence. "Do you understand what you see?" asked the angel, his voice echoing inside me. "Who is this man?" I managed to stammer, although the answer was already pulsing in my mind. "He will be a symbol of transformation," Luciel replied, his tone filled with regret. "But humanity will need to discern between truth and illusion." "Is he bad?" I asked, but Luciel didn't respond immediately. Not everything is black or white. Some believe they are doing good, but end up becoming tools of darkness. As I processed those words, the images changed. Now, I saw not only chaos, but also hope. Small groups of people helping each other, sharing what little they had, protecting each other. It was as if, in the midst of the greatest darkness, small candles were lit, spreading a light that, although fragile, was impossible to extinguish. Luciel touched my shoulder. "You must remember this, Thorn. The future is not written in stone. It is made of choices." I felt a chill run through my soul. What can I do? I'm just a man. "It was just men and women who kept the light burning in the darkest of times," replied the angel, his voice carrying ancient wisdom. Before I could ask any more questions, the scene began to fall apart. The visions disintegrated like wind-blown sand, and the spiritual world that seemed so vast began to retract. I knew what that meant. It was time to go back. The return to my body was abrupt, almost like falling off a cliff directly into cold, harsh reality. The first thing I felt was pain. It was intense, overwhelming, like every nerve was screaming. My vision was blurred, and I blinked against the unforgiving white light of the hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic invaded my nostrils, mixed with the constant beeping sound of machines around me. I was alive, but the realization of this brought back an avalanche of memories. Eleanor, the accident, the spiritual world, and then The cruelest truth of all, if I was there, and she wasn't. A man's silhouette formed beside me, silhouetted against the fluorescent light. It was Dr. Samuel Whitmore, a man with a tired expression but kind eyes. He carried the weight of the news he would need to give me. "Thorn Ashford," he called, his voice low and careful. I tried to respond, but my throat was dry, and only a hoarse moan came out. The doctor took a deep breath, his face closing. "You're in the hospital in Asheville. You were in a car accident." His pause was too long, the silence dragging like blades over my skin. "You need to stay calm." Panic settled in my chest. Instinct told me what he was about to say, but my mind refused to accept it. "Eleanor." My voice was just a broken whisper. "Where's Eleanor?" His expression transformed. His eyes left mine, and that was enough. "She didn't make it," I finally said, and the world around me lost meaning. It was as if the ground had opened up beneath me. My mind was spinning. The walls seemed to close in. Everything I felt in the heavenly garden, the peace, the love, crumbled under the crushing weight of reality. "No, that's not right," I muttered. "I saw her. I spoke to her. She was alive. She was there." The doctor and nurse exchanged glances. To them, I was delusional, perhaps the effects of medication or trauma, but I knew what I had experienced. Eleanor had told me I couldn't stay, that my mission wasn't over yet. But how could I accomplish any mission if the emptiness inside me was so great? Grief embraced me with cold arms. If I had listened to Eleanor that night, if I had stopped at the motel, guilt was a living shadow, crawling through my mind, telling me that it should have been me, not her. At that moment, lying in that hospital bed, I didn't want to be there, because, without it, the world seemed like a place devoid of light. The days in the hospital dragged on as if time had lost its meaning. The hours were just invisible marks on the wall, the monotonous sound of machines around me filling the void. Every breath felt like an unnecessary effort. There was no more purpose. There was no more Eleanor. I existed, but I didn't live. Dr. Samuel Whitmore visited me regularly. There was something different about him, a kind of empathy that went beyond professional obligation. He sat next to the bed, sometimes in silence, other times asking trivial questions, but always with that look of someone who saw beyond the surface. One day, he finally brought up the subject I had been avoiding. "Thorn, do you remember anything after the accident?" His voice was calm, but there was a restrained intensity. The question caught me off guard. I had kept everything to myself, afraid that if I spoke out loud the memories would dissipate like smoke. But there, in those tired eyes, I saw a spark of hope. Something told me he wouldn't think I was crazy. I've been somewhere else," I began, hesitantly. I saw my life flash before me. I found Eleanor. There was an angel, Luciel, and he showed me things about the future. Dr. Whitmore didn't react with disbelief. On the contrary, he just nodded, as if he had expected exactly that answer. "You're not the first one to tell me something like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've heard other reports. People who were on the verge of death. They also saw lights, entities, received messages." My hands were shaking. So it wasn't just a delusion. It wasn't my mind trying to deal with the trauma. He shook his head. "Science has its theories, but not everything can be explained. Sometimes what we see when we are between life and death goes beyond what we can understand." That brief moment of connection brought a new perspective. If what I experienced was real, then so was the mission Eleanor mentioned. But I still didn't know what this mission was, nor how to find it. However, something inside me began to awaken, a spark that had long been extinguished. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something to fight for. After my release, leaving the hospital was like emerging from a long swim in dark waters. The world was still the same. People coming and going, cars honking, the wind rustling the leaves on the trees. But I was no longer the same man who got into that ambulance the night of the accident. My old life felt like a black and white movie. Coming home without Eleanor was a constant reminder of emptiness. His clothes were still hanging in the closet. His books were stacked next to his bed. His favorite mug was in the sink. Everything around me screamed his absence. For days I wandered through the rooms, lost between the present and memories. On one of these walks, I found the small green stone. It was a piece of jade I had as a child, a reminder of simpler times. My mother always said it was a stone of hope. The cold touch of the stone against my skin brought a flash of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Maybe Eleanor left me that sign. Maybe, somehow, she was still with me. I started leaving the house. At first, just walks without a destination. But little by little, I became aware of the world around me. I saw an elderly man struggling to cross the street, an exhausted mother balancing bags and a baby, a young man sitting on a bench, his face buried in his hands. Before, I would have passed right by, immersed in my own problems. Now, I stopped. These small gestures led me to Clara Morrow. She was sitting alone on a park bench, her eyes red and swollen. Something in his expression called to me. I sat next to him, saying nothing. After a few minutes, I asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" She started hesitantly, but as the words came out, it was like she was releasing years of pain. Her abusive relationship, the feeling of having no way out, the desperation that led her to that bank with intentions that she didn't dare verbalize. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "If you weren't here today, I don't know what I would have done." That moment crystallized everything Lucielle and Eleanor had tried to show me. My mission was not grand. It did not involve crowds or great deeds. It was simple. Be present, being a light, even if small, in the life of someone who was in darkness. As time passed, my pain turned into purpose. I didn't need the spotlight, found organizations, or become a public figure. My mission was silent, almost invisible, but I knew that every small gesture mattered. I started looking for those moments. I visited shelters, hospitals, walked through less crowded squares and streets. I've learned that sometimes all a person needs is someone to ask, "Are you okay?" The jade stone was always with me. It became a physical reminder of hope, an anchor for the days when grief still pulled me down. Every time I held that stone, I remembered the heavenly garden, Eleanor's smile, Lucielle's words. The future was shaped by choices, and I chose to be the light in the darkness. One cloudy afternoon, I found a man sitting on the steps of a church. His hunched shoulders and lost gaze made me stop. I sat next to him and offered him a hot coffee. I didn't ask anything. He started talking. He talked about how he had lost his job, his family, his faith. For hours, he poured out his anguish, and I just listened. When he finished, he felt lighter. "Thank you," he said. "No one has listened to me for a long time." These meetings became part of my routine. I didn't seek recognition. I just believed that every small action created waves, as the voice in the spiritual realm had taught me. Little by little, I saw how this made a difference. The people I helped started helping others. The man on the steps was now serving soup in a shelter. Clara Morrow volunteered to listen to young people in crisis. It was as if each spark of light ignited another. And as modest as it was, I knew it was fulfilling the purpose Eleanor had mentioned. I felt his presence beside me, like a gentle breeze, a whisper that I was on the right path. My heart still aches for your absence. Some nights, I still cried silently, allowing the tears to wash away the grief that never completely went away. But in the morning, there was always a reason to get up. There was someone else in need of help, another chance to spread the light. At the end of each day, when the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I held the green stone and gave thanks, not just for the opportunity to live, but for the chance to make this life worth living. After all, the real miracle was not coming back on the other side, but learning to choose the light every day. Today, as I look back, I see how my life was shaped by the choices I made, both before and after the accident. If there's anything I learned from that near-death experience, it's that true power isn't in great deeds, but in the small gestures that spread light in everyday life. Every smile, every word of comfort, every outstretched hand can be the difference between hope and despair for someone. The city of Asheville became my silent mission field. I came to know the faces of the people in the squares, the names of the homeless, the stories of those who seemed invisible to the rest of the world. I discovered that often the simple act of listening was enough to change the course of a life. I didn't need to offer miracle solutions, just my genuine presence. The green stone was still with me. It became an amulet, not for luck, but for purpose. Every time I held her, I felt a direct connection to Eleanor, as if she were there, guiding my steps, smiling at every little spark of light I helped ignite. The memory of her was no longer just pain. Now, It was a constant source of inspiration. One day, while helping at a shelter, a young woman approached me. His eyes had that glow of someone who had found a new chance. It was Clara Morrow. She was there, not as someone who needed help, but as a volunteer. Your smile told me everything I needed to know. The waves we created continued to spread. In the evening, I used to walk to a hill on the outskirts of the city. From there, I could see the horizon tinged with orange and gold, a silent reminder that even after the darkest night, the light always returned. I would close my eyes and for a moment, feel the celestial garden around me, the soft whisper of Eleanor's voice and Lucielle's presence, as if the veil between the worlds grew thinner in those moments. My testimony is not about awesomeness, but about humanity, about how even in suffering we can find redemption, about how by choosing to be the light, we not only heal ourselves, but we also light the way for those who are still lost. And by sharing my story, I hope someone else finds the courage to choose the light every day, just as I do. If you've reached the end of this story, my request is simple. Look around you. See people beyond appearances. Hear what is not said. And remember, every choice creates waves, and you can be the spark that ignites hope in someone's life. Because, in the end, we can all be the light we seek so much. With my story told, I feel like a cycle has closed. The journey that began on that dark, rainy road took me further than I could have ever imagined. Death was not the end, but an awakening to life, and every step I've taken since then has been guided by the light I found on the other side. Today, as I walk the streets of Asheville, I recognize faces, share smiles, and sometimes just sit next to someone in silence. I learned that silence is also a hug, that being present can be the greatest gift. I no longer need the answers to all the questions. I accept that life is, in itself, a mystery, and that love is the thread that unites each piece of this divine tapestry. Eleanor is with me, always, in every gentle breeze, in every ray of sun that breaks through the clouds. I feel your touch, your encouragement. Lucielle taught me that the future is made of choices, and each day is a new opportunity to choose the light. I choose every day, and I know that this choice will never be in vain. The little green stone is still in my pocket. For many, it's just a stone, but for me, it's a reminder that even the smallest things can carry the greatest of meanings. And, just like this stone, every gesture of kindness, every act of compassion, can be an anchor for someone who is adrift. If I could leave one message, it would be this: don't wait for the extraordinary. Miracles happen in small things in everyday life. Every smile, every kind word, every choice to love instead of judge. Because, in the end, what really matters is not how long we live, but how much we light the path of those who walk alongside us. Thank you for listening to my story. If she touched your heart, then all the suffering, all the loss, and every tear had a purpose. And perhaps, together, we can continue creating waves of light that reach those who need it most. May you choose to be the light, and may this choice transform the world around you, just as it transformed mine. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time,